Hi guys, welcome to today's session. We're carrying on with this lemon piece, which is the third part in this series. So we spent the first session just blocking in a wash drawing sketch for the piece. So getting all our shapes in place, this sort of shadow shape separate from the light shape on the lemon and so on, the shadow on the ground. Last session we worked on, the second session we worked on colouring it. Third session we started to develop the form, so this is the fourth one, and we're looking at starting to build up some more specific textures. So obviously the lemon, lemons always have a dimply sort of skin, so we're going to try to start building that into it. The link for the reference is in the description if you want to work alongside, or you can set your own fruit still life up, obviously. But yeah, what we're going to do today is start trying to kind of figure out how we can best capture this texture, and also think a little bit about the sort of presence of the texture in the lemon, or where we want to kind of play up the texture based on the direction of light. So because the light is falling sort of from above and hitting a kind of high point here, it means that we end up with more textures, more sort of raking textures coming along the halftones. I'm going to begin just like I did last week, just using a bit of my medium, which is just some linseed oil mixed with mineral spirits, and I'm just going to oil in the piece. So particularly through the shadows, I just want to resaturate the painting because it will have, well, it has just slightly sunken in, which means it's gone a little bit lighter, a little bit less saturated. Hair there I'm going to remove. So just adding in a layer of the medium that I'm using for the day. Very thin layer, so not very much at all, just very thinly spread over the surface. Resaturates everything back to its true colour. It's important that you do that when you're working on a piece like this over multiple days, so that the colours are always the same every time you work on it. Otherwise you end up with different times to work on it. You'll have different colours. The palette I'm using is the same, so I've got a bright yellow, which is cadmium yellow, but you could use anything you've got, like a lemon yellow or primary yellow, those sorts of things people often have in their collection of paints. Got some burnt umber. Prussian blue, ivory black, and I'll put a little bit of extra white out as well. I'm fairly familiar with my colour mixtures, so if you're sort of at this stage of a painting, you should know what colours you're mixing together, because you'll have done it a few times. So a bit of white there. So the first thing I'm going to place in, which I haven't really done yet in the painting, is take a little bit of white. And I'm using small brushes for this one. So a little bit of white, and I'm going to start just placing some shapes where my sort of shiniest portion of the lemon is going to be. So I'm doing very small shapes, so starting to capture that dimpled texture. And it's important that we get the highlights in reasonably early. Could have even done it actually before this stage. So that we've got something to compare our halftones and our darks to. So I'm just patching them in, copying, kind of approximately copying the texture. I'm not going sort of super specific with it. Just kind of roughly capturing the feel of that highlight in the texture. That's not too bad. And there's also just a few little highlights at this end as well. And maybe just one up there, and that roughly does it. So from there I'm going to mix up a slightly kind of paler yellow, so not quite as bright as pure white. Then gradually keep adding to that yellow, just until it's sort of at a level more similar to the original yellow that I had down. And then we can start to patch that in a similar way. I'm going to try not to create too excessive texture in this lightest portion of the lemon. So I don't want this section to feel as textured as the lemon as it turns towards the halftone. So I'm just using CAD yellow and white at this stage. So I'm just taking my time just to place just these same little sort of dimpled strokes. So at the moment I'm only really working with kind of adding lighter tones over, but once we get to the edge of the form we'll start to work a bit more. We're sort of almost getting to that point where we'll start to add some darker tones as well, just to kind of create the sense of it being a more of a texture. But up here it's primarily at this stage just laying in these highlights. And that's something we can develop. Next session will probably be the final session. We'll kind of tweak these sorts of things a little bit as necessary. So as it slopes down towards the half tone, I'm just going to mix a little bit of sort of burnt umber and Prussian blue. So I want the tones to just kind of diminish a little bit in that direction. I'm just following, pretty much using the sort of colours I established in the first passes over. So I remember the mixtures that I used for these bits. So I'm going to keep these lighter colours travelling down towards the halftone, but I'm going to start laying over the top of that, where necessary, some slightly little darker kind of indents back. As I said, we won't complete the texture this week. We'll keep working on it next week a bit. But we're just starting to try to get the texture in place. Everything will be sort of adjusted and pulled together in the final session once it's had a bit of time to dry. So a slightly darker tone I'm going to mix up again because we're going further and further down this edge of the lemon. And this is where we're going to see more of the kind of extreme contrasts. More of the texture will appear. using a darker tone to kind of go back in and kind of rework up into some of the highlights, sort of soften them off slightly, give them a bit more form. But it's a pretty simple process, you can see. Not too hard to emulate this sort of thing yourself. And this is specific, obviously, to lemon textures, but you just use the same same sort of approach whatever you're painting. It would be a bit easier probably working on something like something smoother like an apple. You'll have some color shifts, but mostly it'll be kind of more of a rounded, smooth shape. So your highlight would just be a bit more sort of rounded and specific. You wouldn't be working with so much complex texture as you get with something like a lemon. So the lemon's a good exercise, but you could start with something a bit more manageable. And it's always good to kind of paint a bunch of different things as well, so you can sort of see how the different textures of different subjects look, or how they sort of function. And in the final session, we'll be sort of starting to tie these bits and pieces together. So maybe, you know, you won't get everything perfectly in sort of at this stage. There might need to be some adjustments that you make to sort of the hue. So like maybe some parts of it I'm not quite as happy with the sort of color of the lemon. But I can use things like glazes, scumbles that we'll be doing next week. And also sort of address, kind of coming back to it after a little bit of a break away, can sort of see what definitely works in terms of the textures, what doesn't, what maybe needs to be added to, or you can sort of lift things that work from one area and put them in another, and so on. Just going to take a bit more pure white. Just want to expand this highlighted region slightly to get some of these lighter bits traveling a little bit higher up into the top of the lemon up here. It can sometimes pay to, so what I'm going to do is probably go a little bit sort of brighter than seems entirely necessary today with these lightest bits of the lemon. But if I glaze, if I glaze the yellow back over next week, I'll be able to get some nice kind of zingy, very light yellows, I think. So that's going to be one thing we'll be looking at next week, is how to use those sorts of techniques as a substitute for just sort of direct painting, like we are today. So today I'm kind of mixing and direct painting up, mixing up and direct painting these colors. But another method is to have a lighter color than you want, often white, and then just glaze the color over it. So we'll be trying that out as well. the last, just final thing I'm going to do, get a little bit more burnt umber just at this edge. I want to put some slightly warmer tones kind of mixing into the, blending up into these more lemony colours. So just some pure burnt umber using a clean brush just to kind of rework this edge slightly. We'll be doing a little bit more of this sort of thing next week. I'll pull that down towards the shadow just to warm up the shadow a little bit with a glaze. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today. So you can see the texture's really come along a lot. It's given us a good sort of position to come back to it next week, adjust stuff, make stuff a bit more complex where necessary. But yeah, it's pretty simple. All the kind of brush strokes were roughly repetitive. I just kind of shifted the color, so we went from a really light color and the sort of shiny highlight part of the lemon, and then just gradually mixing our darker tones, just using the cadmium yellow and getting down into Prussian blue and burnt umber into the half tones, then a little bit of burnt umber to finish off. And we'll be using pretty much the same colours next week, but just kind of working a bit on top of this texture. Now that it's in place, I've got something to kind of work with. So it's always best to kind of get stuff in and then correct rather than be too fussy about it, whether it's working perfectly or not at any given moment. But yeah, that's it. As always, if you subscribe to the OCAD YouTube channel, you get this and lots of other great videos and weekly videos from myself and other contributors. So yeah, definitely sign up and check out the links if you want to see other options for learning through OCAD. But yeah, that's it, and I'll see you guys next week.